Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience and welcome to the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance webinar. My name is Barbara Buchner. I'm Senior Director of Climate Policy Initiative and I'm leading the lab secretariat. And I will present this webinar together with Claire Painter, who is Senior Associate of Climate Policy Initiative and also with the lab secretariat. So in today's webinar, we will provide you an update on progress the lab has made over the last months. So let me just start with an overview of today's webinar. We will first cover what the lab is, including its objectives and outcomes, and the timeline of the lab. Claire will then give a detailed presentation of each of the lab's instruments and will conclude by looking forward before moving to questions. The format of this webinar will be a 40-minute presentation followed by a question and answer session. I will ask all attendees to be on mute, but during this time you're welcome to submit questions already by typing them into the chat box. We will then address the questions during the Q&A session and will be also happy to answer questions via email after the event. Just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be available online after the event. So what is the lab? The Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance is a public-private initiative that supports the identification and piloting of cutting-edge climate finance instruments. It aims to drive billions of dollars of private investment into climate change mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. The lab is part of broader government and private sector efforts to scale up climate finance. It aims to respond to the urgency of the climate challenge by accelerating the development of promising climate finance proposals so that they are ready to implement. By quickly developing project-ready solutions that can be implemented in the short term, it aims to complement existing processes. Who is behind the lab? The lab is guided by 22 principals and their advisors, who are senior, high-level experts in climate finance. Members include representatives from governments, pension funds, investment banks, project development and development finance institutions across the world. And you can see an overview of the logos of involved entities on this slide and a list of the specific individuals on our website. The lab has been developed by the US, the UK and Germany in partnership with several climate finance donor countries, including Denmark, France, Japan, the Netherlands and Norway, and key public and private sector leaders. CPI has been chosen in a competitive tender process to act as the secretariat for the lab and is providing analytical support in collaboration with Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Moving to the objectives and outcomes, let me stress that the lab brings a new approach to catalyzing private investment in climate-friendly projects. By identifying, stress testing and supporting the piloting of the next generation of climate finance instruments, the lab aims to demonstrate that new and improved instruments can provide concrete solutions to financing challenges faced in real projects and backed by real investors. This, in turn, can build new markets, attract new investors, and help unlock billions of dollars in new climate-friendly investment in developing countries. The lab is focused on building the track record necessary to boost market confidence in low-carbon, climate-resilient investment and facilitate investment at scale. The measure for success will be through the facilitation of effective pilots of lab-tested instruments and to encourage their application at greater scale and in different sectoral, technological, and geographical contexts. In a nutshell, the lab aims to quickly move from talk to action to develop implementation-ready projects that address both investors' and recipients' country needs. So let me now give you a quick overview of the timeline and the process of the lab. The Secretariat launched a call for ideas and received over 90 proposals from a range of organizations and actors across the world. At the inaugural meeting of the lab on June 3rd in London, lab principals from a wide range of public and private institutions located again in developed and developing countries in consultations with advisors and other experts selected 7 climate finance instruments ideas to further analyze and stress test. Between June and October 2014, the lab secretariat has conducted an in-depth analysis of these ideas. The main goal of this analytical phase was to identify the context in which each proposed instrument will eventually operate, the barriers they aim to address, and their alignment with the overarching criteria of the lab as measured by their performance over a set of indicators. The lab secretariat presented the results of this analysis at the lab advisor meeting on the 20th October of 2014, where lab advisors, in consultation with their principals, selected 4 from the 7 instruments to move forward to the next phase of the lab's work. Backed by proponents and the identified implementation partners, detailed analysis currently continues on the selected instruments through to April 2015, utilizing more refined analytical tools to address questions left open in the previous phase with the aim to suggest improvements on the instrument design, identify remaining risks that have to be addressed, and outline pathways for implementation. In addition, outreach is being conducted to support proponents in establishing partnerships and sourcing funding. The outcome of this current phase is to present a concrete implementation path for instrument pilot or replication, along with an assessment of the potential for broader scale-up of the instrument. And the lab principals will meet again on the 16th of April 2015 in New York to endorse their top instruments and to consider recommendations on how and where the most promising instruments could be specifically piloted through lab-backed public-private partnerships. The initially selected 7 ideas include instruments to improve the risk-return profile of green investments, facilitate greater numbers of climate-friendly investment opportunities, and improve the climate resilience of agriculture. The 4 instruments that were selected to move forward to the current phase of the lab's work at the lab advisor meeting in October 2014 are highlighted here in the table, and Claire will now discuss them in greater detail. With this, let me give the floor to you, Claire.
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning and afternoon to all. I will be presenting an overview and update of the 4 instruments that were selected at the second Lab Advisors meeting in October last year. Each of these instruments has the potential to drive climate investment in developing countries at scale. For each instrument, I'll present an overview of how it works, key findings from our analysis, and next steps. The first instrument we will discuss is the Climate Development and Finance Facility, or CDFF, proposed by the Dutch Development Bank, FMO. In recent years, an increasing number of developing countries have established supportive regulatory frameworks for private investment in infrastructure. However, project finance remains scarce and requires multiple providers. CDFF is designed to address several issues with building and financing renewable energy and other climate-related projects in developing countries, including origination of bankable projects, timely provision of finance at terms appropriate for construction and operation risks, deal flow at appropriate risk levels to appeal to private investors, and knowledge and skills barriers for project developers and local finance institutions. The key innovation for this instrument is providing a pipeline of bankable projects and removing complexity from construction finance. There are many facilities that do this, however few target both together. This instrument proposes the creation of a new entity managed by FMO and a private sector fund manager that would provide fast-track finance using 3 facilities for different phases of the project lifecycle. The first, a development facility, mostly backed by donor funds, would support the project development costs up to 50% of their value until financial close. Its specific aim would be to improve bankability of projects from an early stage. The second, a construction finance facility funded by development finance institutions and commercial investors that provides equity capital up to 75% of construction costs. Because such a facility would reduce both complexity and development time, with fewer financiers per project developers to negotiate with. It may also reduce the overall cost of financing and project development. And finally, a refinancing facility, which would allow private investors to provide long-term and low-cost debt capital due to lower risk post-construction. In terms of the lab, this initiative would aim to pilot at least 10 projects in several low and lower middle income countries, targeting at the same time private equity and institutional investors. The key findings from our analysis indicate that this instrument is uniquely innovative by providing a pipeline of bankable projects and removing complexity from construction finance. The time frame for pilot can begin within 6 months once donor capital has been identified. In terms of next steps, the proponent has undertaken significant preparatory work and engagement, including identifying donor capital to facilitate startup, and this includes 150 million of total donor capital, which includes 50 million for the development facility and 100 million for the construction finance facility, 400 million in subordinate and senior tranches at commercial rates for the construction finance facility, which would be targeted to DFIs and private investors, and 500 million in long-term debt for the refinancing facility from DFIs and institutional investors. In addition, work is continuing, seeking partnership arrangements with other development finance institutions, finalising effective governance arrangements across the facility, and developing a strategy to market and investor propositions. The next instrument is a joint proposal by the Inter-American Development Bank and Calvert Investments, the Agricultural Supply Chain Adaptation Facility, or ASCAF. Agriculture plays a key role in the Latin America and Caribbean economy, accounting for approximately 5.5% of regional gross domestic product and 17.7% of employment. There are approximately 15 million family farms, 35% of which rely solely on agricultural activities for their livelihood. However, observed climate change has already posed many challenges to agricultural production in the region, resulting in crop losses and affecting the functioning of markets. One estimate indicates that the negative impacts of climate change will reduce the value of annual agricultural exports in the Latin American and Caribbean region by 32 to 54 billion US by 2050. So in terms of the lab, ASCAF aims to arm agricultural producers with finance and improve capacity to enable them to make investments that could help to increase crop productivity and to reduce the climate vulnerability of agricultural value chains. In particular, this instrument addresses small to medium-sized producers and processors' lack of access to medium and long-term finance for climate-resilient investments. Lenders credit default risks as well as knowledge, skills and incentive gaps. This instrument proposes the creation of a value chain finance platform which would be structured as a lending facility supported by donor trust fund, through which multilateral development banks would employ donor-backed guarantees to absorb first losses and thereby mobilise greater commercial capital and in conjunction with technical assistance. Partner with agribusiness corporations to channel financing and know-how through their supply chain. In terms of the lab, the ASCAF business model is suited to high-value crops such as coffee, sugarcane and cocoa in tight value chains, which are characterised by relatively few off-takers and a high degree of supplier loyalty. The pilot would take place in countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region, which is the area of operation for IDB, and a region particularly vulnerable to climate variability and change. It is also a region where a number of countries are largely dependent on agriculture. The key findings from our analysis indicate that in the Latin American and Caribbean region, significant investments are needed to bridge agricultural productivity gaps and to expose climate-related risk. In addition, this facility can align with existing interest between buyers and sellers to potentially increase crop productivity, which could enhance the resilience of livelihoods for an estimated 63 to 420,000 farm households. It would also demonstrate the viability of long-term finance to farmers, which would enable public support to phase out and reduce the carbon footprint of supply chains. In terms of next steps, the proponents have determined drive characteristics for the facility and engaged in business outreach activities, including identifying donor resources to set up the facility. Specifically, donor resources required for implementation of this instrument include grants of approximately 30 million, of which 5 million would be used for the pilot, and this would enable the provision of technical assistance services, including capacity building at corporate and farm level, in tandem with lending products to ensure long-term sustainable practices. Concessional reimbursement finance of approximately 120 million, of which 20 million proposition that private actors or MBBs would be unable to otherwise absorb. And finally, co-financing of approximately 240 to 360 million, of which 40 to 60 million would be used for the pilot from MDBs and other private or public co-lenders to support investment in climate resilient measures. In addition to donor resources, the most adequate long-term function. The next instrument we'll be discussing today is the long-term currency swap proposed by the World Resource Institute with implementing partners TCX and IFC. So a bit of background to this instrument. For some countries, especially low and middle income countries that have underdeveloped financial markets, capital denominated in foreign currency may be the only option available for financing clean investment. In these cases, a renewable energy project receives payment in local currency, but needs to pay its creditors in dollars or euro. This arrangement introduces exchange rate risk, which is an important barrier to clean investment in developing countries. Currency mismatches, which are created when liabilities are a currency which is different from that of the asset, can substantially increase revenue risk, increase the cost of capital, and lower the availability of long-term debt, all factors that increase the cost of clean energy and infrastructure. Financial products known as swaps can be used to hedge currency risk by allowing two parties to agree to exchange a stream of payments in different currencies at a predetermined rate, regardless of market exchange rates over the agreement period. While cross-currency swaps are used extensively by global investors, many developing currencies have limited presence in this market. This proposal aims to change that. So this instrument is a partnership between TCX and IFC that will seek to increase the availability of currency swaps for low and middle income country currencies for clean investments. The instrument aims to mobilise $2.5 billion in long-term currency risk management capacity. To achieve the goal of mobilising $2.5 billion in long-term currency risk management capacity, the implementing institutions would establish two facilities that directly address the barriers to greater availability of swaps in the market. So TCX would implement a currency swap facility to provide long-term currency swaps of up to 10 years in frontier markets and illiquid currencies. And ISC will implement a swap guarantee facility that will make long-term currency risk management available to more banks, investors and projects by addressing the barriers of counterparty risk and lessen collateral requirements that keeps them from accessing commercial swap markets. As these markets gain confidence, TCX and ISC would be able to step back, first acting as the market makers, matching two sides of a currency position with other institutions such as pension funds, and then removing themselves from the now mature market. This partnership is expected to help facilitate movement to lower cost and longer term foreign capital in developing countries and increase climate-friendly investment. So in terms of the lab, the long-term currency swap can support investments in many types of climate-relevant projects, including renewable energy, clean transport, water, energy efficiency, in markets with a lack of suitable FX risk management instruments. The lab is currently working with utilities, developers and banks to understand market needs, as well as financial institutions that can help support the deployment of this product. So the key findings from our analysis indicate that this instrument is an innovative way to mobilise climate finance and is based on the proven business models and experiences of the implementing entities. The instrument will pursue additional leverage and support the development of commercial swap markets by exploring market-making opportunities to match currency positions with third parties like pension funds. Swaps provide a direct solution to address exchange rate risk and can facilitate greater finance flows in developing countries. In terms of next steps and requirements for implementation of this instrument, needs include donor contributions to cover the first loss tranches of the currency swap facility and counterparty risk guarantee facility, public and private equity contributions that will earn a return and leverage donor capital within the facilities, partnerships within local financial institutions and or development banks, as well as grant funding to support technical assistance and the development of long-term scenario building and pricing models. And finally today, the last instrument we'll be discussing is the energy savings insurance. So many investments in energy efficiency pay their investors back over time, even if this can take years. Despite this fact, when small and medium enterprises invest in energy efficiency, it is mostly limited to small investments with very short payback periods, such as lighting upgrades, rather than more capital-intensive measures. And this is due to a lack of technical capacity to evaluate energy efficiency investments, and because investments are mostly self-financed. Further, and especially in many developing countries, banks are reluctant to lend given the high perceived risks and the scarce information on the performance and track record of energy efficiency investments. So the energy savings insurance is a proposal put forward by the Danish Energy Agency with a goal to provide an insurance product that assures the financial performance of energy efficiency projects. The main component of this instrument is an insurance product that covers the expected financial value of the energy efficiency savings. It will be provided by a local insurance company to energy service providers and equipment providers and would back a guarantee for their energy efficiency products to their consumers. The local insurance companies would rely on a public implementing institution to help them identify reinsurers and to assess projects. In addition, and in order to increase the level of confidence towards these investments from the private sector, the initiative is paired with a complete package of financial measures which can integrate with existing programs, including credit lines from development banks, which could provide long-term capital, reducing the cost of financing of the project, as well as grant support, which can support the payment of interest in the first years of implementation of the project. Other key elements are third-party verification mechanisms for the energy service providers, as well as the use of standardised contracts. So in terms of the lab, this instrument is expected to be suitable for a wide range of emerging economies, with a pilot for the agro-industry sector in Mexico currently underway and being analysed within the lab for its potential for scale up beyond the Mexican pilot. In terms of key findings from our analysis, it indicates that the instrument is innovative in that it is enhancing investor confidence and trust in the financial viability of energy efficiency investments. For an already mature technology that guarantees returns and acceptable paybacks, trust of investors and the financial sector seems to be the final step towards a concrete investment. The instrument proposes measures that will be phased out once the trust has been built in. It would also make available, for the first time in targeted developing countries, an energy savings insurance product that will complement other energy efficiency initiatives. However, in order for this instrument to be successful, it needs to be complemented by additional measures which may increase the level of complexity in negotiations needed to replicate the instrument beyond the pilot. This issue can be overcome, however, by identifying an implementing entity at a national level, such as the National Development Bank, that is willing and able to take on the role of coordination between relevant stakeholders. In terms of next steps, the proponent is already well underway with planning the pilot in Mexico, having made contact with potential stakeholders, securing funding through the Clean Technology Fund, as well as bilateral support from Denmark for setting up the pilot program. Beyond the pilot phase and providing an update on the lessons learned on the pilot business model and how it influences investment decisions will be required, as well as fast-tracking finance and supporting pilot investments in further Latin American countries and other regions. Thank you. I'll now hand back over to Barbara.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And so just to recap a little bit, currently we do have detailed analysis that continues on the selected instrument through to April 2015, utilizing more refined analytical tools to address the questions left open in the last phase and conducting targeted outreach and support proponents in establishing partnerships and sourcing funding. And you've already seen a very helpful contributions from both IDB and Calvert in the context of AFCAF, and I thank them already now for all the help, both during the development of the instrument, but also now here in like making sure that we actually really make the most out of the design of this lab instrument. So the goal of this current phase is to present a concrete implementation path for an instrument pilot or replication, along with an assessment of the potential for broader scale of the instrument at the next lab principal meetings, which will take place on April 16th in New York City, hosted by Bank of America, one of our lab members. At this lab meeting, lab principals will be asked to endorse their top instruments and consider recommendations on how and where the most promising instrument could be specifically piloted through lab-backed public-private partnerships. Going forward, the lab's success will increasingly be defined by its ability to deliver the promise of moving from talk to action. So securing timely and meaningful financial commitments from donors, other lab members, including the private sector, is critical to achieving this end and represents one of our current priorities. And lastly, there is potential and strong interest to continue the lab beyond its current cycle, which will conclude at the end of April 2015. This interest is, for example, demonstrated by a very positive response to lab side events and a number of external high-level references to the work of the lab at COP20. So we are currently exploring this option of extending the lab into a new cycle, and we certainly will keep you updated as this progresses. And with this, let me now conclude the presentation and thank all of you for attention and already for the first questions that we received. It is now really your turn. We look forward to receiving further questions, and I'd like to ask you to continue to type your questions into the chat box on the lower right-hand side of the screen. And we'll take now a few minutes just to gather a few more questions, and then we'll get back to you with the answers. Okay, hello, and we're back, and thank you all for submitting so many questions. We're going to start replying to some of the specific instrument relevant questions and then finish off with some of the more general ones. And again, let me also thank the lab members who are in this discussion today, as I said, including Gabriel Calverts, Eli Duncan, and Kelly from IDB, and also Michael Liebrecht, one of our lab principals, who also is on the webinar today. So thanks for that. So let me just start with ASCAF as the first instrument. And Peter Schultz, regarding to your question, what should be the rationale, the advantage for donors to take on the first loss portion? Kelly already answered that in the chat box, but still it's really that donor resources would assume the first loss position that MDBs and other market-based lenders are not able or willing to take, and they would transfer the know-how on climate adaptive practices via technical assistance. So the advantage would really be to support climate resilient development, and as Kelly had said, it's really the space that offers the greatest catalytic effect of donors' capital. Joseph, will there be similar facilities for African countries? Again, this is something Gabriel has anticipated in the beginning. The first stage is to look at Latin America, but the expectation would be to replicate it in African countries, and outreach with a relevant institution is already currently ongoing. As regards the question on whether biomass projects are included in these facilities, measures currently supported would depend on the corporations, farmers' needs and their priorities. And again, as Gabriel has already written there, any leads on good corporates would be very welcome, and we really ask us for your help. If you are aware of anyone who would be interested to green their supply chains through ASCAF, we certainly would be happy to get in touch. And let me just move on to some of the specific questions related to CDFF. The first one was, what would be the average size of the 10 pilot projects? And the answer here is that each project is estimated to be around 150 million US dollars total investment costs. There is another question regarding CDFF, which is how the 10 pilot projects are going to be selected and whether this process is going to be open for proposals. And the answer here is that the selection process of the projects will be subject to a mandate agreed between the investors and the fund manager for each of the components of the CDFF. So as the lab engages with public and private investors to finalize the design of the CDFF, the selection process will also be defined. So this is work in progress. Looking at another question, which was how much flexibility is there for tranching, both as an internal credit enhancement technique as well as selling to different markets such as banks, institutional investors, etc. The answer is that that is in fact part of the design of CDFF, and we're still currently working on that, so we will ask just your patience as we are working with proponents and we are certainly working on this component both at the construction and operation phases. Moving to the question regarding our FX facility, the proposed swap facility is different from the current DCX facility in two ways. The first is that it can provide swaps at longer tenors, up to 10 years in fact. And the second is that it makes swap available to more counterparties that would not be able to otherwise access it because of credit risks. So it can lower the cost of swaps by narrowing the credit spread, and we were currently working on how the interest rate swaps can actually be factored in to lower the price further. Moving now towards questions regarding the energy savings insurance, we have a question here whether the pilot in Mexico is in ESCOs or in independent usage of energy efficiency products. And the answer here is that it's not related to ESCOs, as the instrument targets countries where the ESCO market is not very well developed. And the instrument targets mainly equipment providers that can use the insurance to backup guarantee attached to their products. However, the instrument doesn't exclude them in principle. So that I think should also answer one of the other questions that have been raised with regard to this instrument here. There has been one more question on our perspective using more traditional instruments such as climate bonds, which are more conventional, but not much more used in developing countries. And here for us really, and that is an overarching criterion of the lab, is innovation is a key indicator. So we really try to understand whether some of the more traditional instruments can be applied to new contexts, to new technologies, to new sectors, to new geographies, because again, the overall goal of the lab is really to come up with catalytic instruments that really can drive private investments in developing countries at scale. Let me move to one more question here, again related to a question from Matt, actually, who asked that these tools, that all the tools here are inherently assuming that the projects are financially viable once this financing and knowledge barriers are overcome. And many energy efficiency and clean projects may not be least cost service provision even with this support. And whether we are having any consideration of pricing or obviously paying for the externalities, which means for the actual emission reductions or emissions avoidance. And in the context of the work that we're doing for the energy savings insurance, the focus really is on commercially viable energy efficiency projects where the credit risk has to be overcome. So it does not directly price externalities, but the externality costs of fossil fuels is a motivation from multilateral development banks and from donors to support the energy savings insurance, and also of other lab instruments with a similar perspective. We've just received one more question regarding ASCAF, and that is from Tracy on whether forest protection features are built into the ASCAF facility. What we are currently working on with IDB and Calvert is actually that environmental and social safeguards of the facility would strive to ensure forest protection. And on the other hand, the technical assistance component of the facility would also play a role on this regard, for example, by transferring best farming practices to growers. So with this, let me just take a few more minutes to gather a few more questions and then reply to them. Okay, thank you very much for your patience. So let me just come to a few more general questions, and then in case there is additional ones, I'd be happy to, obviously, with the support of my team here, to answer that. And I just want to also use this really to shout out a big thank you to the whole team here at CPI and also Bloomberg New Energy Finance, with whom we've been working to really put the work of the lab into practice, and where we're trying hard to really move from talk to action. So just to the more general question, there was a first question how other experts can participate in the lab. Just on that point, as I said in the beginning, we do have currently 22 lab members. And in order to keep the decision-making and analytical processes streamlined and to move quickly to implementation, the participation in kind of the lab meetings is currently limited to principals and their advisors, but we certainly are actively seeking opportunities to take on board other experts' input and really make sure that the work that we're doing is representing the best knowledge that we have. And many of you actually here on this call are part of the overall working groups that we're putting together, and we certainly hope that we can over time make sure that we take on board more expertise and more advice in order to make these instruments really a game changer. Just a question we had which relates a little bit on the interface between the lab and other forum, including the UNFCCC forum and the Green Climate Fund. And there the lab from its beginning has aimed to complement UNFCCC processes by catalyzing new sources of financing. As I said in the beginning, it's part of broader government and private sector efforts to really scale up investments. And so it can provide successful examples that could inform specific multilateral processes and mechanisms. And also the lab members actually make sure that there are linkages to other forums. There include prominent climate finance experts from both the public and private sector, few whom represent governments and also non-government actors, including the private sector, involved both in the UNFCCC and in the Green Climate Fund, including through the private sector advisory group of the private sector facility. So these linkages, we hope, will help ensure information and ideas can flow easily between the lab and this fora. And we really hope that the lab is being perceived as being an offer to other fora, because we really are seeing ourselves as a factory of ideas getting to a point where we have operational and financial operational instruments that are ready to be implemented, and we'd be very happy if they will be taken up by other forums, including by the Green Climate Fund. And there were a few questions also by Alexandra actually on the link between the lab and Bloomberg New Energy Finance FIRE initiative. And again, Michael Liebrecht is on the call, and also a few of our other colleagues from UNEF seen, like Kieran. And so how are they similar, how are they different, and whether a FIRE endorsed project can become a lab one, and whether we are thinking about merging. I think FIRE and the lab certainly share a common goal to identify climate finance solutions and help reach them scale. The FIRE process is broader in scope and focuses more on the private sector-led instruments and champions, while the lab focuses more on instruments that more likely need public finance or public finance institutions to catalyze private finance, particularly in developing and emerging economies. So we are working together. As I said initially, CPI has been chosen as the secretariat and is providing, together with Bloomberg New Energy Finance, some of the analytical services to the lab. And we are also, as the lab, drawing on initiatives, including those of the FIRE team, to maximize synergies. So, for example, in the list of the 7 instruments that were analyzed initially within the lab, we had one of the FIRE winners, the debt fund, that was also a part of the lab process. So we certainly want to make sure that we are together really going closer to the goal of really like scaling up green investments. I think in the meantime, let me just move back to some of the questions that we got regarding some of the instruments again. So moving to a question regarding ASCAF, which related to whether the emission reduction quantifications is a performance indicator of the ASCAF. And here the answer is that indicators to measure ASCAF's impact on the ground are currently under discussion, and they would be defined once with the pilot in place. So again, this is work in process, but it's certainly an issue which we're looking into. Another question related to ASCAF is what is the threshold, financial input and the contribution from a corporate institution. And And the answer here is that corporate contributions would obviously depend on the size of the investment to be supported by the facility. And again, we are currently working on these issues, and if there's some more interest or some specific interest from some corporates, we'd be happy to be in touch. There is a follow-up on a question if of the assumption that the lab has made and how we can come up with the assumption on the energy savings insurance instrument, and whether there is any specific examples of the project that the lab has examined in that context. And the answer here is that the assumptions in our analysis are based on published reports and also on interviews with a wide range of sectoral experts. So we have not modeled specific projects in this last phase, but we're working on specific modelings in the current phase. But we have, in parallel to that, for the St. George Group, which is another fora of where we bring together financial intermediaries and public and private investors, the lab analysts have conducted financial models for more than 10 renewable energy efficiency and adaptation projects in Africa, Asia, and Europe. So we are drawing on this expertise at the moment to make sure that we are incorporating that in the current design phase of the different instruments, including of the energy savings insurance. And there was one additional question related to the CDFF and asking what the criteria were used for the selection of the 10 pilot projects. And there we actually assume that this is directed at the CDFF directly, and it's not setting up projects at the moment yet. We're not yet at that stage. We have not selected any projects yet. We are currently engaging with public and private investors within the lab to gauge the best criteria, and we certainly will be very transparent and share the outcomes of this process and on the specific project selection process once we are at that stage. I'm just pausing for 1 minute to see whether there is any final question. Select through, look through all the many questions that we have gotten and that we continue to get. And I think given that we are actually getting to the end of our allocated time for this webinar, I think I'm going to wrap it up here, and we'll be happy to follow up on some of the other questions afterwards. Maybe just the final answer I'm going to reply to is just related to the MRV framework of the CDFF projects. And here is, as an infrastructure fund with both public and private investors, we certainly will, make sure that the appropriate MRV reporting to meet the donor needs will be in place. But again, this is one of these issues that we're currently exploring and in which we are actually working across the different projects. And so we'd be very happy to, keep you updated as we are making progress with the current phase of the instruments, and then also making sure that we really manage to kick them off towards piloting after April this year. So I think with that, I'm just going to thank you very much for your interest and questions. Please do reach out to us. You see on the screen our both the website and our contact email. And you've seen also in the chat that again, some of the proponents from COVAD and IDB particular are here and are available to follow up with you on specific questions. Afterwards, we want to make sure that we take your expertise and your advice on board. Please reach out to us in order to make sure that while we are, making progress with the design of our work, we can take on board all the expertise that you have. Again, this is supposed to meet the broader goal of moving us towards action and really to scaling up private investments in developing countries. And I thank you all very much for your help in that and for your interest in the lab. And please just stay in touch with us, and we'll make sure that the recorded webinar will be available on the lab website within 5 business days, and we'll also make sure that we'll continue to keep you up to date through subsequent webinars. So with that, thank you for joining us very much today, and have a nice day, evening, wherever you are, and we very much look forward to staying in contact with you. Thank you very much.